need that blank spot.
1, 2,
Foreheads, I'm
3,
telling you,
4,
foreheads are-
5,
Look at the wall in the
6,
back.
7.
Just stare really
That means
fast.
8.
Thank you.
Alright, go.
I'm Liz, and I'm going to do my speech on Alice Paul. In 1917, Alice Paul and hundreds of other women were put in prison and brutally force-fed when they were fighting for women's rights to vote. Alice Paul spent most of her life tirelessly fighting for women's rights. I have personally done a lot of research on this topic and have taken the BCC class in Gender Women's Studies. Alice Paul was one of the most influential women in the fight for women's suffrage. In this speech, I'll talk about Alice Paul's growing up as a Quaker, her start of becoming an activist, her fight before 1920 when the 19th Amendment was put into place, and her fight after 1920. Alice Paul grew up only knowing that women were equal to men. She was born in 1885 and was born into a Quaker family. She was born in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, and that's her house right there. She went to school in a Quaker community, which taught her women were equal to men. She graduated first in her high school class in 1901, and then went on to Swarthmore College, which was also a Quaker college, and she graduated with a biology degree for her bachelor's. Alice Paul went to England in 1907 to study social work. One day when she was walking down the street in England, she saw a huge protest of people and decided to stop to see what it was about. She found out later it was about women's suffrage and it was people fighting for women's rights. She decided to join the violent protest and was arrested over 10 times and imprisoned over 10 times. In this protest, they did a hunger strike and they were brutally force-fed in the jails there. When Alice Paul returned to America in 1910, she was inspired by the English protests and decided to rejuvenate the American protests and use what she learned from the England protests. She met with the NAWSA, which is the National American Women's Suffrage Association, and she eventually became the head of the Congressional Committee. She decided to form a parade, and on March 3rd, 1913, there was a huge women's suffrage parade that made headlining news, which brought out a lot of news for the women's suffrage campaign. In 1917, she decided to picket the White House. After she left the NAWSA, she formed her own committee called the National Women's Party, and she organized the Silent Sentinels, which picketed outside the White House for the president. When the U.S. entered war in 1917, Wilson no longer supported their campaign and decided to turn his back on them. They were all arrested and they were charged with obstruction of sidewalk traffic even though they really weren't doing anything. They refused to pay the small fine, so they were jailed. In the movie Iron Jawed Angels, Lucy Burns states, to pay the fine, they would be admitting that we're doing guilt. We haven't broken a law, not $1 that they're going to pay. So they all went to jail, where they were brutally beaten, punished, and thrown around in unsanitary rat-infested jails. They started a hunger strike, and they were brutally force-fed, and they became really weak and brittle. As the PBS Kids website states, newspapers carried stories about the jail terms and the focused feedings of suffrages. The stories angered many Americans and created more support than ever for the suffrage amendment. In 1917, Woodrow Wilson reversed his position and said that he agreed with the women's suffrage, and he started the 19th Amendment in 1920, which gave women right to vote. After 1920, a lot of women dropped out of the fight because they thought that it was all over now that women had the right to vote. But Alice Paul knew that it wasn't over and that she needed to fight to give women more equality. So after 1920, she came up with the Equals Right Amendments, which basically just said that women were completely equal to men in every way possible, like work and school and everything, that they should have all equality. She also came up with the World's Women's Party, and she traveled around the world to different countries, trying to get them to have the same rights that we did in America. So, and as Alice Paul quoted in 1917, this is on the Alice Paul Institute website, "I never doubted that equal rights was the right decision. Most reforms and problems are complicated, but to me nothing is complicated about equality." So to conclude, Alice Paul is a very influential woman for the women's equality. Her Quaker background gave her a lot of opportunities that women never had. And when she got out of that neighborhood of the Quakers, she realized what women were going through, and she wanted to fight and did fight until her death to give women's rights. So next time you think about equality and men and women and women's rights to vote, you can think about Alice Paul and all of her friends who were brutally beaten and force-fed in jail for women to have their right to vote.
Ask questions.
Oh, of course.
Oh, question.
Alright, you go first.
Nick.
Oh, boy.
You've been around like this general area for a while, right? Like, and you said that her house was in Mount Laurel. Have you
Yeah.
ever seen it, like personally?
No, it's on Route 38.
Okay.
It's not Laurel. It's like right past the
Oh,
North Town Mall.
Personal best.
Eric.
Title IX states that women have to have the same amount of opportunities in schools. What are your thoughts on women being able to participate in male sports teams
Ooh.
in schools?
Ooh. I think that if the woman wants to do that, that's her right to do it. But it's obviously dangerous because of the different strength between men and women, so that's something that they should look at when deciding that. But if it's the woman knows what she's getting into, then she definitely should have the right to do that.
That's fair enough.
Mike.
Like,
Yes. You stated early in the 1900s there were many women activists, riots, if you will, that triggered these events. What caused these riots?
women didn't have rights.
Like specifically speaking, like what was the one thing they were like upset about? Like, was it just not being able to vote, or were they?
It was mainly they didn't have rights, they weren't equal. But as Alice Paul, the reason that she formed the National Women's Party was because the NAWSA wanted full equality, and she wanted to start off with the women's rights to vote and conquer that, and then go on to more equality. So that's basically what she was
Well,
doing.
thank you for clarifying.
You mentioned this National Women's Party. Who was the last president elected from that party?
I'm not sure.
One more, Nick. Last question.
Forget.
You forget.
Come back.
Come back. Okay, that's the
Any
last
other
one.
questions?
Oh yeah. Do you think that today's American society would be different if she was never involved in any of these protests?
Real question.
No, I definitely think that it would be different because she was one of the main people who got women the right to vote. So it was definitely like she was the main person who was inspiring everybody else. Yeah.
All right.